when Gerry said foresight is not the test, as Vera has outlined, it said, but it might be evidence that you can be used in support of intention.
Yeah.
So the language that generally is used in criminal courts now is what did they contemplate? And what that does is draw in what are labelled inferences. And it's said to be reasonable to draw inferences of what young people, women, black people, autistic people contemplated. So you're focusing a trial on essentially what did they foresee. And that draws in terrific bias narratives. That's where language is used in court in a persuasive way, because that's what we as barristers are trained to do, to say, well, they must have contemplated violence because 3 people there had a bat, and there are cases on this where the Court of Appeal have said this is fine, they all contemplated because they're all in it together. So I don't want to go on and on about it, but that language of foresight and contemplation is where all of these narratives are driven, whether it's gang membership, whether it's a woman who is responsible for the behaviour of her violent partner, whether it's an autistic child with challenging behaviour where their past behaviour is relied on a sad character rather than a trait of their condition. So what you have is very, very privileged people. Even if they're socially mobile, they've become King's Counsel, very, very privileged people interpreting within that language of contemplation. And it really broadens the scope for saying, for example, all the schoolboys in that park when there was a fight are all guilty. We picked the few that we can identify on the footage, so they're obviously guilty. And you might just have a boy in his blazer watching a school fight who is suddenly guilty of murder because somebody's stabbed. And the Court of Appeal has said, really, that's not an overwhelming supervening act because you're all there and you're all in a crowd. So we have this language of contemplation being used to assume that everybody is all in it together, which I think is very objective. And your contemplation and then your knowledge of what the principal party is going to do should be subjective. The law is meant to be subjective, but I think what we end up is an objective assessment of contemplation and knowledge before we even get to intention that is driven by very privileged people who, frankly, in my observation, often sort of genuinely believe they're all guilty without, and are offended if you accuse them of being sexist or racist or lacking in understanding it. And so that I think is where the problem is arising.